I don't know if you're the guy I want at this moment." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, delivered over leftover pizza in our cramped apartment living room while the evening news droned in the background. After 4 years together, this was how Brooke chose to detonate everything we'd built. I met Brooke during our sophomore year at the community college in Albuquerque, where I was grinding through my pharmacy technician program while working nights at a 24-hour Walgreens to pay tuition. She was studying business administration with her parents footing the bill, always dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. What started as study sessions at the library turned into coffee dates, then weekend adventures hiking the Sandia Mountains. I fell hard for her infectious laugh and the way she made everything feel possible, even when my bank account said otherwise. Growing up in a working-class family where my dad fixed air conditioners and my mom cleaned office buildings, I learned early that stability meant everything. Brooke came from a different world where her biggest worry was choosing between spring break destinations her parents would fund. But somehow we clicked, and I thought our differences made us stronger. I was the steady one, the planner, the guy who showed up when I said I would. She brought spontaneity and dreams that stretched beyond paycheck-to-paycheck living. For 4 years, I believed we were building something real together. I supported her through failed job interviews, celebrated her small victories, and never missed an important moment in her life. When she got her first marketing job after graduation, I took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant I could afford and listened to her talk about her future with genuine pride. When her anxiety kept her awake at night, I'd rub her shoulders and remind her how capable she was. I thought loyalty and consistency were attractive qualities, not character flaws. That Tuesday evening started like countless others, with me picking up dinner on my way home from the pharmacy where I'd just finished a double shift covering for a sick coworker. Brooke was already on the couch, scrolling through her phone with that distant expression that had become increasingly common over the past few months. I noticed she'd been texting more frequently, smiling at messages she never shared, taking calls in the bedroom with the door closed. When I asked about it, she'd brush me off with vague explanations about work drama or old friends catching up. I should have pressed harder, but I trusted her completely. After we finished eating, Brooke set down her slice and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, calculated and slightly nervous, like someone about to make a business presentation she'd rehearsed multiple times. She told me she'd been thinking about us, about where we were heading, and whether we were settling for comfort instead of pursuing real happiness. The way she spoke sounded rehearsed, clinical, like she'd practiced these exact words until they felt natural. Then came the revelation that explained everything about her recent behavior. Ryan, her high school boyfriend, had reached out through social media a few months ago, claiming he'd changed and grown up since their messy breakup years earlier. They'd been talking regularly, having deep conversations about their past and what could have been different. She described their reconnection as innocent at first, just nostalgia and curiosity, but admitted those feelings had evolved into something more complicated. Brooke insisted she wasn't cheating, technically, since they'd only talked and exchanged messages, but her emotional investment in someone else felt like betrayal regardless of the physical boundaries. She wanted to explore what might be possible with Ryan while keeping me as an option, asking me to wait while she figured out her feelings. The audacity of her request was breathtaking, presented as though she was offering me some generous opportunity to prove my devotion. Brooke framed her ultimatum as radical honesty, claiming most people would have just cheated behind my back instead of having this difficult conversation. She suggested that my willingness to wait would demonstrate the strength of my love and our relationship's foundation, implying that resistance would prove I didn't really care about her happiness. According to her logic, I should feel grateful for her transparency and support her journey of self-discovery, even if it meant watching her pursue someone else. She promised that whatever happened with Ryan, I would always be important to her, though she couldn't guarantee I'd be her final choice. The manipulation was subtle but obvious once I recognized it, designed to make me feel selfish for wanting exclusivity and commitment after 4 years together. I sat there absorbing her words while she watched my reaction carefully, probably expecting tears or desperate pleas for her to reconsider. Instead, I found myself studying this person I thought I knew completely, realizing that beneath the familiar face was someone capable of coldly calculating relationship dynamics like a business transaction. The woman who used to curl up against me during movie nights, who claimed my steady presence made her feel secure, was now explaining why that security felt suffocating. She wanted excitement, unpredictability, the thrill of someone who might disappear at any moment rather than the boring certainty of someone who'd never leave. Brooke painted Ryan as everything I apparently wasn't: spontaneous and passionate, someone who lived in the moment rather than planning for the future like some kind of relationship accountant. She described their recent conversations with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in her voice when talking about me in months, her eyes lighting up as she explained how he'd traveled the country after high school, lived in different cities, taken risks I'd never consider because I was focused on building a stable foundation for us. The contrast was obvious and deliberate, designed to highlight my supposed shortcomings while elevating his supposed virtues. I thought about all the times I'd chosen us over advancement opportunities, the Denver job I'd turned down because she wasn't ready to leave New Mexico, the social events I'd skipped to work extra shifts so we could afford the apartment she wanted in a better neighborhood. All those sacrifices that demonstrated my commitment apparently proved nothing except my lack of imagination and ambition. Brooke seemed almost pleased with herself as she finished her speech, like she'd handled a delicate situation with admirable maturity and fairness. She probably expected me to fight for her, to argue passionately about our history and potential future together, to promise I could change and become more exciting if given the chance. Instead, I heard myself agreeing to her terms with a calmness that surprised even me. I told her she deserved to explore her feelings and figure out what would make her truly happy, that I understood her need for certainty before making such an important life decision. The relief on her face confirmed everything I needed to know about how she really viewed our relationship and my role in her life, a comfortable backup plan rather than her first choice. Sitting there listening to Brooke's ultimatum, I couldn't help but think about everything I'd sacrificed for what I thought was our future together. 4 years of being the dependable one apparently meant nothing when weighed against rekindling an old flame with someone who represented everything I supposedly wasn't. I'd been Brooke's constant support through every crisis and setback, working extra shifts at the pharmacy to cover our expenses when life got difficult, never once making her feel guilty about the financial imbalance between us or questioning whether my sacrifices were appreciated. When she was laid off from her marketing position, I immediately picked up additional hours so we could maintain our lifestyle without her having to move back with her parents or significantly downsize our living situation. For 3 months, I worked doubles almost every day, coming home exhausted while she browsed social media and half-heartedly applied for jobs that met her increasingly specific criteria about company culture and work-life balance. I never complained about the physical exhaustion or the stress of carrying both our financial responsibilities, just quietly adjusted my schedule and cut back on my own expenses because I believed we were truly a team working toward shared goals. When Brooke's grandmother fell seriously ill with pneumonia the previous winter, I drove her to Tucson every weekend for 2 months, giving up my only days off and burning through my vacation time so she could spend precious hours at the hospital bedside. I'd sit in uncomfortable waiting room chairs for hours reading pharmacy journals while she held her grandmother's hand, never once suggesting that maybe she could make some of those trips alone or with other family members who lived closer to the hospital. Her grandmother recovered eventually, and Brooke was genuinely grateful at the time, sending me sweet texts about how supportive I was and how much it meant to her family that I was there during such a difficult period. But apparently my reliability and consistency during that crisis registered as basic expectation rather than extraordinary devotion, just another example of me doing what any decent boyfriend should do without requiring special recognition. I turned down a promotion opportunity at a larger pharmacy in Denver 6 months ago, a position that would have increased my salary by $15,000 annually and provided better benefits and career advancement opportunities, because Brooke wasn't ready to leave Albuquerque and didn't want to start over in a new city. She'd just begun feeling comfortable in her current job and had started building a social network of coworkers and friends that she didn't want to abandon for my career advancement, even though the move would have been financially beneficial for both of us and opened up better opportunities in her field as well. I respected her feelings completely and withdrew my application without resentment, telling myself the right opportunity would come along again when the timing was better for both our lives. Now I realized that sacrifice was just another item on a long list of compromises I'd made while she mentally compared me to someone who'd never had to choose between his dreams and anyone else's comfort or convenience. The past 8 months had shown me a different side of Brooke, though I'd been too emotionally invested and trusting to recognize the warning signs clearly or question the dramatic changes in her behavior and attitude toward our relationship. Her phone had become a constant companion, buzzing with notifications at all hours that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen directed at me in ages, her face lighting up with an excitement and anticipation that felt both familiar and foreign. During our movie nights, she'd check messages frequently throughout the film, claiming they were from work colleagues discussing projects or female friends sharing gossip. But her body language and flushed reactions suggested something far more engaging and emotionally charged than casual conversation. She started making increasingly unfavorable comparisons between my predictability and what she called her need for spontaneity and adventure, lamenting that our relationship had become too comfortable and routine for someone with her aspirations and desire for excitement. Brooke complained that I always planned our dates in advance instead of suggesting random adventures, that I preferred staying home on weekends rather than exploring new restaurants or taking spontaneous trips to Santa Fe like we used to during our college days when money was tighter but life felt more unpredictable. She wanted someone who would surprise her with last-minute getaways or expensive dinner reservations at trendy restaurants, apparently forgetting that my budget required advanced planning and careful consideration of every significant expense to maintain our current lifestyle. The physical intimacy between us had gradually disappeared over those months, with Brooke claiming stress from work deadlines and fatigue from her increasingly busy social schedule that somehow never seemed to include quality time with me or activities we could enjoy together as a couple. She'd started going out with female coworkers more frequently, staying late for happy hours and weekend events that somehow never included me, even when I offered to join the group or suggested we make it a double date situation. When I asked about these gatherings, she described them as boring networking obligations or therapeutic girl time, making me feel clingy and insecure for wanting to be included in her expanding social life. I accepted her explanations because I trusted her completely, never imagining that her emotional distance and growing dissatisfaction with our routine might be connected to someone else capturing her attention and imagination in ways I apparently no longer could. Looking back now, I could see how Ryan's reappearance had shifted her entire perspective on our relationship, making everything I offered seem inadequate and boring by comparison to whatever fantasy she'd constructed around their renewed connection. She'd started referring to my steady work ethic as lacking ambition, my preference for quiet evenings at home as antisocial behavior, my careful financial planning as excessive penny-pinching that prevented us from truly enjoying life and experiencing the excitement she craved. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same stability and reliability she'd once claimed to love about our relationship was now evidence of my fundamental inadequacy as a romantic partner, proof that I was settling for mediocrity instead of pursuing the bold, adventurous life she apparently deserved with someone more dynamic and spontaneous. The confrontation unfolded in our cramped apartment living room after a mundane dinner of Chinese takeout, with Brooke maintaining an eerily calm demeanor that felt more unsettling than outright anger or tears would have been. She sat across from me on our second-hand couch, legs crossed beneath her, speaking with the practiced composure of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times in her head until every word felt natural and justified. The way she explained her emotional affair with Ryan was masterful in its manipulation, framing her betrayal as radical honesty and personal growth rather than the devastating breach of trust it actually represented. She told me that Ryan had contacted her through social media 3 months earlier, sending a thoughtful message acknowledging the messy way their high school relationship had ended and expressing genuine curiosity about how her life had developed since graduation. According to Brooke, he'd undergone significant therapy and personal transformation over the years, working through the anger and immaturity that had made him such a volatile and unreliable partner during their teenage years. She described their initial conversations as innocent nostalgia, just two former lovers catching up and reflecting on how much they'd both changed and grown since those tumultuous early days when everything felt so intense and dramatic. But as their exchanges continued over weeks and then months, She admitted that their connection had deepened into something far more emotionally charged and complicated than simple friendship or casual reminiscing about shared memories. Ryan had apparently become fascinated by the woman she'd become, impressed by her professional accomplishments and personal development, while simultaneously expressing regret about the opportunities they'd missed by not working harder to overcome their youthful relationship problems. He painted a picture of himself as someone who'd learned from his mistakes and was now ready for the kind of mature, committed partnership he'd been too selfish and immature to appreciate during their first attempt at love. Brooke's eyes lit up as she described these conversations, her voice taking on an enthusiasm and energy I hadn't heard when she talked about our own relationship in months, as if discussing Ryan's transformation and their renewed connection was the most exciting thing that had happened to her in years. She insisted that she wasn't physically cheating, technically speaking, since they'd only talked and exchanged messages without meeting in person or crossing any obvious physical boundaries that would constitute outright infidelity. But her emotional investment in someone else felt like a complete betrayal regardless of whether they'd actually touched, especially when she admitted that she'd been sharing intimate details about our relationship problems and her growing dissatisfaction with what she perceived as my lack of ambition and excitement. The way she spoke about Ryan's supposed growth and maturity made it clear that she'd been mentally comparing us for months, weighing my steady reliability against his promise of adventure and spontaneity, my careful planning against his willingness to take risks and embrace uncertainty. She'd been testing our relationship against some idealized version of what she could have with someone who represented everything I apparently wasn't, someone who could offer her the passionate, unpredictable romance she'd convinced herself she deserved instead of the stable, supportive partnership we'd actually built together. Brooke framed her request for time to explore her feelings as the most honest and mature approach she could take, claiming that most people in her situation would have simply started an affair behind my back instead of having this difficult but necessary conversation. She suggested that her willingness to be transparent about her emotional confusion demonstrated respect for our relationship and commitment to making the right decision for both our futures, even though the conversation felt more like a calculated manipulation designed to secure my cooperation while she pursued someone else. According to her twisted logic, I should feel grateful for her honesty and support her journey of self-discovery, even if it meant watching her actively consider replacing me with someone from her past who'd suddenly reappeared with promises of the excitement and passion our relationship supposedly lacked. She promised that whatever happened with Ryan during this exploratory period, I would always be important to her, and our 4 years together had meant something significant, though she couldn't guarantee that I would ultimately be her final choice if Ryan proved to be the partner she'd always been meant to be with. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable once I recognized the pattern, designed to make me feel selfish and controlling for wanting exclusivity and commitment after 4 years of what I'd thought was a loving, monogamous relationship moving toward a shared future. She presented the waiting period as beneficial for our relationship, claiming that if she chose me after exploring her options with Ryan, it would prove that our connection was strong enough to withstand outside temptation and uncertainty. The absurdity of her reasoning was breathtaking, suggesting that my willingness to tolerate her emotional infidelity would somehow strengthen our bond rather than irreparably damage the trust and respect that formed the foundation of any healthy partnership. Brooke spoke about her need to be completely certain about her feelings before committing to a lifetime with someone, as if 4 years of shared experiences and mutual support meant nothing compared to a few months of nostalgic conversations with someone who'd abandoned her years earlier. She painted herself as a victim of her own honesty, someone brave enough to confront difficult truths about compatibility and long-term happiness rather than settling for comfortable mediocrity. The way she described Ryan made it obvious that she'd already made her emotional choice, talking about him with a wistful admiration that bordered on worship while discussing our relationship as a burden she'd been carrying out of obligation and habit. She spoke about his travels after high school, his willingness to take risks and chase dreams without worrying about financial security or practical consequences, making it clear that she saw these qualities as evidence of his superior character and life philosophy. According to her narrative, Ryan represented authentic living and passionate commitment, while I represented fear-based decision-making and settling for safety over authentic happiness and personal fulfillment. Carter maintained his composed facade while internally recognizing that he'd become a backup plan rather than a valued partner, deciding that dignity required action rather than passive waiting for someone else to determine his worth. The following morning, after Brooke left for her job at the local advertising firm where she'd recently started working, I systematically began packing my essential belongings using the old duffel bags we'd taken on camping trips to the Jemez Mountains during happier times. I moved through our shared space methodically, like someone conducting an inventory rather than dismantling 4 years of accumulated life together, carefully selecting items that belonged unquestionably to me while leaving behind anything that might complicate the clean break I was determined to make. I folded my clothes into neat stacks, unplugged my electronics and wound the cords properly, gathered important documents from the filing cabinet we'd organized together, and packed sentimental items like my grandfather's vintage Timex watch and the framed photo of my parents from their 25th wedding anniversary. Every movement felt deliberate and final, like closing chapters of a book I'd never need to read again, though I was careful not to act out of spite or anger that might make me regret my decisions later. I left behind shared possessions and furniture we'd accumulated together, the coffee maker we'd bought after moving in, the throw pillows she'd insisted would make the living room more inviting, the small kitchen appliances we'd received as housewarming gifts from friends and family who'd believed in our future together. None of those material things mattered compared to reclaiming my self-respect and refusing to participate in whatever game she thought we were playing. I wasn't interested in petty revenge or dramatic gestures that would give her ammunition to paint me as unstable or vindictive when she inevitably shared this story with Ryan and her friends. Instead, I wanted to disappear so completely and quietly that she'd be forced to confront exactly what she'd thrown away without being able to blame my reaction for the consequences of her choices. The apartment felt different as I moved through it for what I knew would be the last time, smaller somehow and filled with the echo of conversations and shared moments that now felt tainted by the knowledge that she'd been mentally comparing me to someone else for months while I'd been planning a future that apparently meant nothing to her. I wrote a brief note on the back of an old pharmacy receipt, keeping my message professional and final without giving her any opening to manipulate the situation or draw me into extended negotiations about our future. The words came easily because I'd been thinking about them since her ultimatum the night before, crystallizing my decision into a simple statement that couldn't be misinterpreted or twisted into something it wasn't. I wrote, "Good luck with your choice," in my careful handwriting and left it on the kitchen counter next to my apartment keys, right where she'd see it immediately when she came home expecting to find me waiting like an obedient backup option. I took one final look around the apartment that had been our home for 2 years, noting details I'd probably never see again, the water stain on the ceiling from the upstairs neighbor's leak, the scuff mark on the hardwood floor where we'd moved the couch too enthusiastically during a cleaning frenzy. I loaded my belongings into my reliable Honda Civic and drove across town to my coworker Ben's house, where I'd already arranged to stay temporarily while I figured out more permanent housing arrangements. When Brooke returned home that evening expecting to discuss the details of our new arrangement, she found an empty apartment and my keys on the counter, along with a note that made my position unmistakably clear. I can only imagine her confusion and growing panic as she realized I wasn't hiding in the bedroom or running errands, that I'd actually left completely rather than agreeing to wait around like a devoted pet while she decided whether I was worth keeping. Her first call came within 20 minutes, followed by a text asking where I was and whether I was okay, as if my physical safety was her primary concern rather than the collapse of her carefully orchestrated plan. When I didn't respond immediately, the calls began coming more frequently, then the voicemail started, her voice progressing from confused concern to frustrated demands for explanation to what sounded like genuine panic as she realized I wasn't playing by the rules she'd established. By the end of that first evening, she'd left 87 voicemails, a number I discovered the next morning when I finally checked my phone and scrolled through the increasingly desperate messages that chronicled her emotional journey from confident manipulation to shocked disbelief. The early messages were calm and slightly condescending, asking me to call her back so we could discuss my reaction like mature adults. She reminded me that we'd agreed to take time to explore our feelings, as if I'd somehow forgotten the conversation where she'd asked permission to pursue someone else while keeping me as a backup option. But as the evening progressed and I continued to ignore her attempts at contact, her tone shifted dramatically, becoming more frantic and demanding as she realized that her carefully planned scenario was falling apart in ways she'd never anticipated. She accused me of being childish and dramatic, of abandoning our relationship at the first sign of adversity instead of fighting for what we'd built together. The irony was breathtaking, considering that she was the one who'd brought another man into our relationship and demanded that I accept her emotional infidelity as evidence of her honesty. Later messages revealed her growing desperation as she started making promises about limiting her contact with Ryan and focusing on repairing our relationship, suddenly discovering appreciation for qualities she'd been criticizing for months. She claimed she'd made a terrible mistake in approaching the situation the way she had, that she'd been confused and overwhelmed by Ryan's sudden reappearance but now realized that what we had was worth fighting for. But her promises felt hollow and calculated, desperate attempts to regain control rather than genuine recognition of the damage she'd already caused. The final voicemails were barely coherent, with Brooke crying and pleading for me to come home so we could work things out, insisting that she loved me and had never meant to hurt me so deeply. She begged me to give her another chance to prove that our relationship was her priority, that Ryan was just a distraction she'd gotten carried away with because of their shared history. But even in her most vulnerable moments, she couldn't fully take responsibility for the betrayal, still framing her emotional affair as a mistake in judgment rather than a deliberate choice to prioritize someone else's attention over our committed relationship. Listening to those messages the next morning while drinking coffee in Ben's kitchen, I felt oddly detached from the drama, like I was observing someone else's relationship crisis rather than living through my own. Carter blocked Brooke's number and ignored her escalating attempts to re-establish contact through work email, mutual friends, and family members who called him selfish and immature for abandoning her during such a difficult time. I made the decision to cut off all communication within 48 hours of leaving, realizing that any response would only encourage her to continue the manipulation that had characterized our final conversation. The blocked calls continued for days, showing up as missed notifications from unknown numbers as she tried different phones and borrowed devices from friends who probably thought they were helping someone in genuine crisis rather than enabling someone's attempt to maintain control. Her desperation led her to contact my workplace, leaving messages with the pharmacy receptionist claiming there was a family emergency, forcing me to have an awkward conversation with my supervisor about my personal situation and request that they not forward any more calls from her. Brooke's mother called me 3 times during the first week, leaving hostile voicemails demanding that I return home immediately to fix the situation I'd supposedly created by abandoning her daughter. According to Mrs. Patterson, I was being selfish and immature by walking away from a relationship that just needed communication and compromise, as if Brooke's emotional affair was merely a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better conversation skills. Her younger brother Marcus sent several aggressive text messages threatening to confront me personally if I didn't start treating his sister with the respect she deserved, apparently unaware that respecting someone doesn't include accepting their request to explore relationships with other people while keeping you as a backup option. The family pressure campaign revealed how completely Brooke had manipulated the narrative, painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable reaction rather than acknowledging her role in destroying our relationship through emotional infidelity. Instead of engaging with the pressure campaign or trying to explain my perspective to people who'd already made up their minds, I focused on rebuilding my independence by securing a studio apartment in a different neighborhood across town, far enough away that I wouldn't accidentally run into Brooke during routine errands or social activities. The new place was smaller and more expensive than my share of our old apartment, but it represented a fresh start without constant reminders of the life I'd thought we were building together. I returned to activities I'd neglected during the final months of our relationship, joining a rock climbing gym where I could challenge myself physically while clearing my head of relationship drama, and rediscovering my love for mystery novels that had taken a back seat to Brooke's preferences for romantic comedies and reality television shows. The simple pleasure of reading books I actually enjoyed, without having to negotiate every entertainment choice, felt like recovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. My performance at the pharmacy improved dramatically as I volunteered for additional responsibilities and earned recognition from my supervisor for renewed dedication and attention to detail that had been suffering during the final stressful months of trying to save a relationship that was already over. The promotion opportunity I'd turned down in Denver was no longer available, but my district manager mentioned that similar positions might open up in the future for employees who demonstrated consistent excellence and leadership potential. For the first time in years, I found myself genuinely excited about my career prospects rather than viewing work simply as a means to support a lifestyle that someone else had designed around their priorities. The emotional manipulation attempts intensified when Brooke appeared at my workplace during my lunch break, looking disheveled and desperate as she pleaded with me to have a conversation about our relationship and the mistakes she'd made. She claimed she'd ended all contact with Ryan and was ready to focus entirely on repairing the damage, but her promises felt hollow and calculated rather than genuine recognition of the betrayal she'd committed. I maintained my boundary by having security escort her from the premises, a humiliating experience for both of us but necessary to demonstrate that I wouldn't tolerate her attempts to manipulate me through public scenes or workplace confrontations. The incident led to another conversation with my supervisor about personal matters affecting my professional environment, but he was understanding and supportive about my need to maintain clear boundaries with someone who was refusing to respect my decision to end our relationship. Brooke's final attempt to regain control involved showing up at Ben's apartment building, somehow discovering where I was staying and waiting in the parking lot until she saw me return from work one evening. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying for her, as I refused to engage with her emotional appeals or promises to change, simply stating that our relationship was over and asking her to respect my decision by leaving me alone permanently. She looked genuinely shocked by my calm demeanor and complete lack of anger or emotional investment in her distress, as if she'd expected me to still care enough to fight with her or show some sign that her suffering was affecting me the way she'd intended. But I'd moved beyond anger into something closer to indifference, recognizing that the woman standing in front of me crying about her mistakes was the same person who'd coldly calculated how to keep me as a backup option while pursuing someone else. The desperation in her eyes was almost pitiable, but I'd learned to distinguish between genuine remorse and manipulative performance, and everything about her approach suggested she was more concerned with regaining control than actually understanding the damage she'd caused. When she realized that I wasn't going to engage with her drama or provide the emotional response she was seeking, her expression shifted from wounded vulnerability to something harder and more resentful, revealing the anger underneath her facade of regret and personal growth. She accused me of being cold and unforgiving, of throwing away 4 years over a mistake that could be fixed if I was willing to be mature about the situation and work through our problems like adults who truly cared about each other. The audacity of framing her emotional affair as my failure to forgive was breathtaking, but I simply nodded and walked away, leaving her standing in the parking lot with her accusations echoing off the empty cars around us. That final encounter confirmed everything I needed to know about her character and my decision to end our relationship completely rather than trying to salvage something that had been fundamentally broken by her willingness to prioritize someone else's attention over our supposed commitment to each other. 4 months after Carter's departure, mutual acquaintances reported that Brooke's reunion with Ryan had become a disaster of epic proportions, unfolding exactly as anyone with basic understanding of human nature could have predicted. The fantasy she'd constructed around their renewed connection crumbled almost immediately when faced with the reality of Ryan's actual character and priorities, which apparently hadn't changed nearly as much as his carefully crafted social media messages had suggested during their emotional affair. According to Lisa, who worked with Brooke at the advertising firm and couldn't resist sharing gossip during our brief encounter at a coffee shop, Ryan had proven to be financially irresponsible and emotionally volatile within weeks of their official reunion, displaying the same immature behaviors that had ended their high school relationship years earlier. He'd convinced Brooke to lend him money for various business ventures that immediately failed, starting with a food truck concept that never got off the ground despite her contributing $3,000 from her savings for equipment deposits and permit applications. The pattern continued with a series of get-rich-quick schemes that all required upfront investment from Brooke, who was apparently so desperate to prove that her choice had been correct that she kept funding his failures long past the point where any rational person would have recognized the obvious red flags. Ryan had also become increasingly possessive and controlling after securing Brooke's commitment, monitoring her social media activity and isolating her from friends who questioned his influence over her decisions and financial contributions to his various failed projects. He'd insisted that she delete contacts from male coworkers and avoid social gatherings where other men might be present, claiming that his jealousy was evidence of how much he loved her rather than recognizing it as toxic behavior. The same spontaneity and risk-taking that Brooke had found so attractive compared to my careful planning revealed itself to be reckless impulsiveness and poor decision-making when applied to real-world responsibilities like paying bills and maintaining steady employment. While I had been working extra shifts to support our shared goals and building toward a stable future, Ryan had been drifting between temporary jobs and half-hearted attempts at entrepreneurship, never staying committed to anything long enough to achieve meaningful success or financial security. His supposed personal growth and therapy-induced maturity proved to be nothing more than manipulation tactics designed to win back someone he viewed as a prize to be conquered rather than a partner to be cherished and supported through life's challenges. When Ryan disappeared suddenly after maxing out Brooke's credit cards with cash advances for what he claimed was a time-sensitive investment opportunity in cryptocurrency trading, she lost not only the money she'd loaned him but also her apartment when she couldn't make rent payments that had been dependent on his promised contributions. The eviction forced her to move back in with her parents in embarrassment, a 30-year-old woman who'd thrown away a stable relationship and financial security for someone who'd exploited her trust and left her worse off than she'd been before their reunion. Her professional reputation began suffering as she frequently called in sick due to stress and depression, struggling to maintain focus at work while dealing with the financial and emotional aftermath of Ryan's betrayal and abandonment. Eventually, her erratic behavior and frequent absences led to her termination from the advertising firm, eliminating the income she desperately needed to dig out of the financial hole Ryan had created through his exploitation of her misplaced trust and romantic fantasies. Brooke's desperate attempts to reconnect with Carter became more pathetic and manipulative as her situation deteriorated, including showing up at places she knew he frequented and sending letters through mutual friends claiming she'd learned valuable lessons about appreciation and loyalty. She tried to paint Ryan as abusive and herself as a victim who'd been manipulated into making poor decisions, conveniently forgetting that she'd been the one who'd initiated contact with him and chosen to prioritize his attention over a committed 4-year relationship. Her revised narrative positioned her as someone who'd been deceived rather than someone who'd made calculated choices to pursue excitement over stability, attempting to rewrite history in a way that absolved her of responsibility for the consequences of her own actions. The letters and messages revealed her growing desperation as she realized that the grass hadn't been greener on the other side, that the spontaneous, passionate relationship she'd craved had been nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion designed to exploit her dissatisfaction with genuine partnership and commitment. But her attempts to reconcile were based on regret about outcomes rather than understanding of the fundamental character flaws that had led to her betrayal, making it clear that she wanted rescue from the consequences of her choices rather than genuine forgiveness for the damage she'd caused. The most telling detail Lisa shared was that Brooke had started asking mutual friends about my current situation, whether I was dating anyone, and if they thought I might be open to hearing from her after everything that had happened between us. Her inquiries revealed a stunning lack of self-awareness about the magnitude of her betrayal and the impossibility of rebuilding trust with someone she treated as a backup option while pursuing someone else. She apparently believed that enough time had passed for me to have gotten over my anger and that my reaction had been disproportionate to what she still characterized as a mistake in judgment rather than a deliberate pattern of deception and emotional manipulation. According to the reports filtering back through our social network, Brooke had begun idealizing our former relationship in ways that conveniently ignored the months of criticism and dissatisfaction that had preceded her ultimatum, remembering only the stability and support I'd provided while forgetting how she'd characterized those same qualities as boring and limiting. She'd started telling people that I'd been the best boyfriend she'd ever had, that she'd been too young and stupid to appreciate what we had together, and that losing me was the biggest mistake of her life. But her newfound appreciation felt hollow and self-serving, motivated by her current desperation rather than genuine recognition of the value I'd brought to our relationship when she'd had the opportunity to cherish and protect it. The contrast between her current situation and the life she could have had if she'd chosen differently was apparently becoming more obvious to everyone around her, including family members who'd initially supported her decision to explore her feelings with Ryan. Her parents had welcomed me into their family for years, and watching their daughter's life fall apart because of her poor judgment had to be painful for them to witness, especially knowing that she'd thrown away a relationship with someone who genuinely cared about her well-being and future success. 8 months after his strategic exit, Carter encountered Brooke at their mutual friend Lisa's engagement party at a vineyard outside Santa Fe, where the contrast between their current situations became starkly apparent and undeniable to everyone in attendance. I arrived confidently with Monica, an intelligent veterinary student I'd been dating for 3 months, someone who shared my appreciation for quiet evenings and thoughtful planning while bringing her own ambitions and independence to our developing relationship. Monica was pursuing her doctorate in veterinary medicine with the same methodical dedication I brought to my pharmacy career, and our conversations about professional goals and personal values felt refreshingly mature compared to the superficial discussions about excitement and spontaneity that had characterized my final months with Brooke. She appreciated my reliability and consistency as attractive qualities rather than character flaws that needed to be overlooked or tolerated, and I found myself genuinely excited about building something meaningful with someone who valued the same foundation of mutual respect and shared commitment that I'd always believed were essential for lasting partnership. The vineyard setting was beautiful, with string lights draped between ancient cottonwood trees and tables arranged on terraces overlooking the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, exactly the kind of romantic atmosphere that would have made Brooke gush about perfect Instagram opportunities and dream weddings during our relationship. But attending with Monica felt completely different, focused on celebrating Lisa's happiness rather than analyzing every detail for its potential impact on our own romantic narrative or social media presence. I'd been looking forward to the evening as a chance to catch up with old friends and introduce Monica to the social circle I'd maintained despite the awkwardness of my breakup with Brooke becoming common knowledge among our mutual acquaintances. Brooke appeared disheveled and desperate when I first spotted her near the bar during the cocktail hour, looking like someone who'd lost significant weight and was showing visible signs of financial stress in her ill-fitting dress and scuffed shoes that had clearly seen better days. The confident, polished woman who delivered her ultimatum 8 months earlier had been replaced by someone who looked defeated and anxious, scanning the crowd with the desperate energy of someone hoping to find rescue rather than simply enjoying a celebration with friends. She was standing alone, checking her phone with the frantic frequency I remembered from her final weeks of our relationship, but now it seemed motivated by desperation rather than excitement about secret communications with someone else. When she spotted me across the terrace, her face went through a series of expressions that revealed everything about her current emotional state: surprise at seeing me looking successful and content, hope that maybe this could be an opportunity for reconciliation, and then something that looked like genuine panic when she noticed Monica beside me, clearly comfortable and belonging in ways that highlighted everything Brooke had lost through her poor decisions. She approached during a quiet moment when Monica had stepped away to congratulate Lisa, her timing calculated to catch me alone and vulnerable to whatever manipulation she'd prepared for this encounter. The conversation she initiated revealed just how completely her life had fallen apart and how little she'd learned from the consequences of her choices, as she immediately launched into a rehearsed speech about Ryan's abusive behavior and her own victimization rather than taking genuine responsibility for the betrayal that had ended our relationship. She claimed that Ryan had been controlling and manipulative from the moment they'd made their relationship official, that he'd isolated her from friends and family while exploiting her financially through various schemes and false promises about their future together. According to her revised narrative, she'd been too trusting and naive to recognize the warning signs that should have been obvious, and her decision to leave me had been the result of his psychological manipulation rather than her own calculated choice to pursue someone who represented excitement and spontaneity over stability and commitment. The way she described their relationship made it sound like she'd been an innocent victim of elaborate deception rather than someone who'd actively participated in an emotional affair for months before delivering an ultimatum that treated me as a backup option while she explored her feelings for someone else. Her final manipulation attempt involved claiming that the experience with Ryan had taught her to appreciate everything I'd represented in her life, that she now understood the value of genuine love and partnership after experiencing what it felt like to be with someone who'd exploited her vulnerability and trust. She insisted that losing me had been the most painful lesson of her life, that she'd spent every day since Ryan's disappearance regretting her decision and wishing she could undo the damage she'd caused to our relationship through her confusion and poor judgment. But even as she spoke about appreciation and regret, her focus remained entirely on her own suffering and the consequences she'd experienced rather than demonstrating any genuine understanding of how her betrayal had affected me or damaged the foundation of trust that had taken 4 years to build between us. She begged me to consider giving her another chance to prove that she'd learned from her mistakes, that she was ready to be the partner I deserved and had always been to her during our years together. The desperation in her voice was genuine, but it stemmed from her current circumstances rather than actual recognition of my worth or the damage she'd caused through her manipulation and emotional infidelity. I listened to her entire speech with the same calm detachment I'd maintained during our final encounter months earlier, recognizing that this was simply another attempt to regain control of a situation that had moved far beyond her ability to influence or manipulate. When she finished her rehearsed plea, I calmly told her that while she was deciding between her options 8 months ago, I had decided to choose myself and build something better with someone who actually wanted to be with me from the beginning rather than settling for me after other opportunities had fallen through. The simple statement revealed everything about how completely I'd moved past our relationship and any lingering emotional investment in her well-being or future success. Monica returned to find us finishing our conversation, and I introduced her to Brooke with the same polite courtesy I'd show to any acquaintance, making it clear that Brooke held no special significance in my current life beyond being someone I used to know. Carter's complete emotional detachment during this encounter represented his full transformation from accommodating doormat to self-respecting individual, while Brooke's isolation and desperation served as natural consequences for her manipulative behavior and poor decision-making that had destroyed a genuine partnership for the sake of chasing fantasies that existed only in her imagination.